When someone is starting out programming, you never ever jump in to the program. What you do first is that you write things out in an English statement so that you can get your thought process. Then we're going to convert the thought process actually into a program. So for this example, we're going to do a point spread. And the problem says a point spread is a term used in sports and gambling to determine the difference between two team scores. For example, if one team scores 20 points and another team scores 30 points, the point spread is 10. A point spread is always a positive number. The task is to write an algorithm that prompts the user for two sports game scores and outputs the point spread. The point spread should always be positive. So, what are we going to need to do for this? In Python, anything that begins with a pound sign on a line means it's a comment. So this is blind to Python, meaning that if I run this, notice nothing appears. Anything that begins with a pound sign is a comment in Python. So let's start off with how we're going to deal with this. The algorithm essentially is we're going to do the following steps. Step number one is get team one score. Step two is to get team two score. Step three is going to be subtract team one score from team two score. Step four is going to be take the absolute value of step three, and step five is going to be to display the results. Excuse me, the result of step four. So my actual program is going to be the following. Now, variable names in Python must begin with an alphabetic character or an underscore or a double underscore, but the underscore and double underscore are more relative to CSC 217, the advanced Python course. For us, it's going to begin with an underscore, and then you can use, excuse me, it's not going to begin with an underscore, it's going to begin with a letter, and then you can use letters and numbers. A rule that is industry wide is that a variable name must, and actually we should use the word shall. Shall is stronger than must. Begin with a letter, and the variable must tell whoever reads it in the future what that variable is going to hold, and it must be in one of two forms. One is known as camel case, where everything is as follows. Or the other one would be snake case. Now, for those who have done anything in C or C++, camel case is the most frequent that you will see for variables. Python, the preferred way is snake case, but you won't be laughed at if you use a camel case. Snake case is the preferred way for Python. Now, if you use a single variable name or a variable name that doesn't tell people what it's going to be holding or what its purpose in life is, then you will be laughed at and considered an amateur. And I don't want anybody here to ever be laughed at. So we're always going to use one of the two cases, snake case or a camel case. And we're always going to have our variable names tell other individuals who come along after us what the variable is going to hold. So for us right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say team one score, and then I'm going to ask the user for input. Now, to ask a user for input, we're going to use the input statement. And the input allows us to put inside the parentheses within quotes, either single or double, what we want people to give us in. And notice there's a small problem here. The problem is that if I want to use a single quote inside this statement, I have to use a different quote on the outside, or I have to use the escape character, which is the backslash. Most people prefer to use the different quote, meaning use a double quote on the outside for the string and a single quote to represent the actual, in this case, possessive, meaning team one's score. Input always returns a string, always. But we're going to be dealing with integers. So now we have to tell Python whatever is given to us, we don't want a string, we want it to be an integer. So this statement right now, and let's turn on line numbers. And the way you do that is you go to options within idle and say show line numbers, and now we get a series of line numbers so that it's easier for us to talk about. So on line 32, we have an input statement that is asking the user for team one score. Whatever is entered is going to be provided back to the program as a string, but we can't do math on a string, so I'm going to tell Python convert whatever the input was as a string into its integer equivalent. And now let's do team 2 score. And again, we're going to want it as an integer. And we're going to say, please enter team 2's score. Okay, now that we have that, we're going to get the point spread. And the point spread is going to be the difference between team 2 score and team 1 score. But we need to take the absolute value of this. So our steps, it says take the absolute value of step 3. Well, this is step 3 in my breakdown of the problem. And so I'm now going to go absolute value, which is ABS, of that difference. Now to print the answer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say print. And to make things look nice, Python print has a thing known as F string, which I'm going to put an F and then a double quote. And then I'm going to say the point spread between team 1 and team 2 is, and I'm going to use the curly braces and put the variable name inside the curly braces. Now what the F string does is it enables us to make a nice fancy print, and it's going to enable us to, as in the attached document, center things within a field width. It's going to enable us to right or left justify. It's going to enable us to do calculations, all within these curly braces. Let's go ahead and run this. And please enter team 1 score, say 35. Team 2 score is 6. The point spread is a 29 because 6 minus 35 gives me negative 29, but I am taking the absolute value, which gives me 29. For our next problem, let's take a look at this one. The following equations estimate the calories burned when exercising. Now, men, that's an interesting formula, and women, that's an interesting formula. So now we have the task is to write a program that inputs the age in years, the weight in pounds, the heart rate in beats per minute, and time in minutes, respectively. Output the calories burned for men and women. And the next line says that we're going to use 2 decimal places for the output. So the 2 decimal places says that we're going to be using an F string, but how are we going to design our code? First thing is we're going to need to ask for the age Then we're going to need to ask for the weight. And next, ask for the heart rate. And we're then going to ask for the number of minutes of exercising. And then we're going to use the formula for men to calculate the number of calories burned. Then we're going to, next step is use the formula for women to calculate the number of calories burned. And then our last step is to display the calories burned for men and women. So again, our variables must begin with a letter, and then they must tell other people what they are going to hold, and then we're going to have certain things here that are integers and certain things that are floating point. Floating point means that they have a decimal point. So I'm going to do age of the man, or I just should say age is equal to, now age is going to be an integer because unless you're under 8 years old, you just say the integer portion of your age. Then we're going to ask for weight. Now, weight is going to be a float because you can be 105.3 pounds. Now, it's very important that you let the individual know how you want the information given. So I'm being very explicit with pounds. There's only 3 countries on the face of the earth that still use pounds for weight. Every other country uses the metric system. So if we want our calculations to come out correctly, we have to make sure that who's ever reading our prompts understands what we want. Units are extremely important. And the 3 countries that still use the imperial system of measurement are the United States and 2 third world countries. Next thing that we need, according to the order, is heart rate. And heart rate is going to be an integer because there's no fractional unit of a heartbeat. Either it did or didn't. And after our heart rate, we need the time of exercising, and the time can be afloat because you could do 3.5 minutes. So, and again, I'm being very specific, asking what I want from the people. Now, our next step is to calculate for men, and then we're going to then calculate for women. Okay, so to make life a teeny bit easier, I'm going to copy this line, but I'm going to change it appropriately. So for example, my variable's name is age lowercase. My variable's name is weight lowercase. My variable's name is heart rate. And my variable's name is time of exercising. Now, because this had little x, and that's not what Python uses for multiplication, I'm going to have to go and replace that little x with what Python does use, which is the asterisk. And now I'm going to do the same thing for the other formula. Again, age, weight, heart rate, and the time of exercising. And I'm going to have to change all these little x's to asterisks. And now comes my output. And my output is going to be print, and I'm going to use an F string. At age, let me individual who is age years old, weighing weight pounds with a heart rate of beats per minute. And what I'm going to do, because this is getting a little bit long, what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this here, but I'm going to say end equals a single space. And if you remember, what that says is stay on the same line for output, but put a space there in between where we're outputting. Now, for an individual who weighs, as we keep going through this, the next thing we need is who exercised for minutes, and I'm then going to say print a male would have burned would have burned and let's give this a shot. In order to run, remember we're going to do F5 or function F5 if you're on a Mac, and it says it came back with an error. So the error, let's try this again. It's saying your heart rate is 88 beats per minute and you exercised for 65 minutes. We end up with a little bit of an issue. The issue is what? Well, it says that and if we read the error, I used a mistyped variable name. Notice there's no O, whereas here there is, and that's an easy fix. And we can easily fix that. And let's run it again. And again, 25, 155, 88 beats per minute, and 65 minutes. It comes back saying that a male would have burned 302 point this mess, and then a woman would have burned 184, which means we forgot a part of the requirement. The requirement was to what? A floating point value that only 2 decimal places. So in order to do that, what I'm going to need to do is here I'm going to go to this part of the F string for min, and I'm going to do point 2F, and over here I'm going to do colon point 2F, and we're going to run it again. We're going to do 25, 155, 88, 65. Now, if you notice, thanks to our F string, we've been able to put everything into 2 decimal places for our result. Now, notice that whenever you have a floating point number, like for example, we said that the weight was floating point, it will always put a decimal and a 0. And same here, we said the time could be floating point. So therefore, it's going to put the decimal and the 0.